I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime. And we wanted to mention that we're watching The Diplomat right now, and we have watched all 7, 8 seasons of The West Wing, and we just love that, Josh and CJ are now married in The Diplomat.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we just finished episode 2, so no spoilers. I know they all drop at one time. But I just love seeing that. I've seen things with Alice Janney before. Obviously, Juno always pops into my brain because we didn't watch, what was the series she was in? Mom, I think. I don't, we didn't watch anyway. But I don't think I've seen Bradley Whitford in much. So, I just like seeing them together because I really liked, of course, I liked CJ and Josh from The West Wing. I really liked their characters. Have to say I don't love Alice Janney's character from The Diplomat, but still like her as an actress. So yeah.
I have to say I definitely liked CJ more than I like Josh.
Well, yeah. I mean, we could talk about maybe we'll talk about The West Wing in another episode. But Josh was clueless for most of the time. I think maybe his heart was in the right place. But yeah, definitely liked CJ. Then of course I really like Kerry Russell from The Diplomat. I mean, we saw The Americans, which I really liked. I wouldn't say that's a happy show.
No.
But yeah, and I think you started and you're like, yeah, this isn't for me. And then you watched it when you were, a little bit older or something. And I think you, I don't know, appreciated it.
Yeah, it was just done really well. Both Kerry Russell and Matthew Rhys just were phenomenal in it.
Yeah, agree. And I'm going to butcher his name. Is Hal from The Diplomat, is it Rufus? Is it Sewell?
I want to say it's Sewell.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Anyways, and when I think of him, I think of, and I almost got the name of this wrong, but The Man in the High Castle, which I know you couldn't get into, and I didn't watch all of it either. Him playing a Nazi, it's kind of hard to like him, obviously, but it always makes me think of, is it Victoria?
Yeah, I always just think of him as Lord M in Victoria.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a bit into our exciting life and what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's get into the episode. We're doing something a little bit different with today's episode since it is spooky season and Halloween is just a few days away. We're going to discuss 2 cases that happened on Halloween. We know many true crime podcasts talk about supernatural happenings, unexplained events, alien abductions this time of year, but since real life is scary enough and I hate creepy stories, we are going to talk about 2 truly horrifying men who committed unspeakable crimes against children on what should be a fun-filled holiday. Autumn in the suburbs of Houston, Texas can be unpredictable. However, rainy weather wasn't going to stop the O'Brien children, Timothy 8 and Elizabeth 5, from trick-or-treating on Halloween night, 1974. The O'Brien family, Ronald, Daneen, and their 2 children, had dinner at their friends in the Bowling Green neighborhood of Pasadena, the Bates. Ronald and Jim Bates agreed to take 2 of the Bates children, Mark and Kimberly, along with Timothy and Elizabeth out to fill their pillowcases with candy. Because the rain didn't seem to be slowing down, the trick-or-treating was confined to a smaller area, just 2 streets, Citation Street and Donnerell Street.
After scoring candy from several houses, the kids ran to 4112 Donnerell, a darkened house. With Ronald following and Jim waiting on the sidewalk, the kids knocked on the door, but there was no answer. They knocked again and then gave up and ran to Jim, who started walking the kids to the next house. Ronald hung back for a few minutes and then joined the group. He said that the homeowner had cracked open the door and handed him some giant pixie sticks. Ronald handed out the candy to the 4 kids along with Whitney Parker, who went to the O'Brien's church. After the group went to a few more houses, they all went back to the Bates home, where Ronald's wife, Daneen, and Jim's wife, Donna, were watching TV. The kids left their Halloween pillowcases with their parents and went into another room to play. The adults watched TV for a bit, and then Ronald and Daneen gathered their kids and returned home. When they got home, Daneen left to run an errand, and Ronald got the kids ready for bed. Elizabeth, exhausted from the evening's activities, went to bed and quickly fell asleep. Timothy asked his dad if he could have a piece of candy before bed. He picked a sucker, but Ronald told him he didn't have time to eat a sucker and suggested he try the pixie sticks. Ronald removed the staple holding the candy together and gave it to his son. Timothy tried to pour some of the powdered candy into his mouth, but nothing was coming out. Ronald helpfully rolled the candy between his hands to loosen it and handed it to his son. Pixie sticks are normally sweet and sour and already nasty, in my opinion, but Timothy said the candy tasted bitter. Ronald quickly grabbed some Kool-Aid so he could wash the bitter taste out of his mouth. Timothy took a drink of the Kool-Aid and then clutched his stomach and said, Daddy, my stomach hurts.
Timothy made it to the bathroom where he began vomiting. Ronald followed Timothy into the bathroom where he helped hold him up while he continued to be sick until his small body became limp and Ronald held him, carrying him to the phone to call for an ambulance. He called emergency services since 911 was not widely available in Texas until 1986. The ambulance arrived at about the same time Daneen returned home. Ronald and Daneen closely followed the ambulance in their car. Paramedics tried to save Timothy, but he died on the way to the hospital, less than an hour after he had poured the bitter candy powder into his mouth. Police arrived at the hospital, and Ronald relayed that he was handed 5 giant pixie sticks from a darkened house and told them who he had given the candy to. Police, acting quickly, retrieved the candy that was still in Elizabeth's trick-or-treat pillowcase and also confiscated the candy from the Bates children. Lastly, the police went to the home of Whitney Parker, the last child that Ronald had given the puckering powdered straw candy to. The boys' parents were frantic when they couldn't find the candy in their son's candy container. They went into the bedroom of their sleeping child and noticed the offending candy in his hand. It looked like he had tried to open it, but was unable to remove the staple.
Well, thank God for that.
I know.
Investigators could see that the 5 pixie sticks were heat sealed on one end, like they were supposed to be, but the other end had been cut open, then crudely stapled back together. Prosecutor Mike Hinton received a call from the Pasadena Police Department informing him that an 8-year-old child had died under suspicious circumstances and that an autopsy would be performed. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Joseph A. Jakimchik conducted the autopsy and determined that Timothy had died from cyanide poisoning. Around 2 inches of the candy powder had been taken out of the 15-inch tube and replaced with cyanide. Pathologists tested the pixie sticks, and each of these cylindrical candies had enough cyanide to kill 2 to 3 adults. The community was notified of the tragic death, and many parents worried that a mad poisoner was targeting their community. Parents brought their children's pixie sticks to the police department, and many of them, much to their children's dismay, brought all the candy their kids received just in case. But only Timothy had consumed one of the poisoned pixie sticks. Ronald was questioned by the police, and he said that they were only outside for about 30 minutes because the weather was so bad. When recalling the horrific events of Halloween night, he was able to muster up some tears and said, "I have peace in knowing that Tim is in heaven now." After he said he wasn't sure if he could remember which house he had gotten the tainted candy from, the police took Ronald to the neighborhood where the kids had gone trick-or-treating. They walked around, but Ronald still just wasn't sure which house he got the pixie sticks from. He told the officers it was dark and rainy, and he wasn't really paying attention to what the house or the person who handed him the candy looked like. After all, they had just barely cracked open the door to hand it to him.
Police were frustrated, but called off the search for the day and told Ronald to really think and try to remember the house where he had been handed the poisonous candy. It was imperative that they locate the house. Thankfully, when the police and Ronald went out the next day, Ronald now remembered the house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The police allowed Ronald to go home. The police looked up the owners of the house and found that the home was owned by Courtney and Carolyn Melvin. Police went back to the house, and Carolyn answered the door. She told officers her husband wasn't home, he was at work. Courtney worked at Houston's William Hobby P. Airport. Carolyn told officers that her husband had also worked on Halloween night, and her daughter had passed out candy but ran out early, so they turned off the light.
A sign you would have thought Ronald would have understood when approaching the darkened house.
I mean, that is supposed to be the universal sign. She said that they did not pass out pixie sticks, and neither she nor her daughter opened the door and handed 5 candy sticks to anyone. Police verified with Courtney's colleagues and his timesheets that he was working Halloween night. With the community's fear of stranger danger raging, the pressure was on the Pasadena Police Department to find out who had poisoned Timothy O'Brien. With no viable leads, detectives began to take a closer look at the O'Brien family. Ronald was well known in the Pasadena and Deer Park community as a church going family man. He worked as an optician in nearby Sharpstown at Texas State Optical. He was a deacon and a soloist at the Second Baptist Church. The day after he murdered his son, no spoilers, he did it.
What? He did? I'm shocked.
Yep, he is a piece of shit. He sang the hymn Blessed Assurance, where he changed the words from This is my story, this is my song, to This is Tim's story, this is Tim's song.
Detectives soon discovered that Ronald had money troubles. His car was about to be repossessed. He had missed several payments on bank loans, and his employer was gathering evidence to fire him for theft. He had also held and lost 21 jobs in the last 5 years, so stability wasn't his strong suit. Detectives discovered that Ronald had taken out $10,000 in life insurance policies on each of his children in January of 1974, and then an additional policy for each child in September. The amount of life insurance varies from source to source, but it ranges from $31,000 to $40,000 between both his children. But why would someone who was experiencing serious financial issues spend money on life insurance policies for his 2 young children? Investigators also discovered that Ronald had called the insurance companies, there were several, on the morning of November 1st to inquire about the proceeds. His wife, Daneen, was unaware there were any such policies, but she did tell the police that they were having some financial problems. Police obtained a search warrant for the O'Brien home and found a pair of scissors with plastic remnants, like what the pixie sticks were made of, stuck to the blades. Pixie sticks are now made of paper, but in the 1970s, Pixie Sticks candy powder was placed in something similar to a plastic straw. Police also found a pocket knife with candy residue, suggesting the knife was also used to fill the poisonous tubes. A customer of Ronald's at Texas State Optical, who worked at a local chemical plant, came forward and said that Ronald had asked him several times about cyanide. Really hammering the nail into his own coffin, Ronald had wanted to know how much cyanide it would take to kill someone and where it could be purchased. A grand jury indicted Ronald on 5 charges, 1 charge of capital murder and 4 charges of attempted murder. Ronald was arrested, and although bail was set at $10,000 for each attempted murder charge, he was held without bond on the capital murder charge, meaning he would remain in jail until his trial.
The evidence against Ronald was damning. An employee from a local chemical company recalled a man coming in a few months before Halloween wanting to purchase cyanide. When he realized that the minimum purchase was £5, he left.
I mean, you wouldn't want to waste money on buying more than you need to kill your children.
I mean, waste not, want not.
Words to live by.
The worker couldn't identify Ronald, but did recall that the man was wearing a blue smock, the kind doctors and opticians wore. Investigators were never able to determine where Ronald purchased the cyanide, and since Ronald continued to profess his innocence through his dying day, he wasn't going to tell them. Numerous people testified against Ronald, including his brother-in-law, sister-in-law, former boss, the pathologist, a loan officer, several insurance agents, and Jim Bates. Jim testified that the kids ran to a house with all the lights off, and Ronald followed them while he waited on the sidewalk. When no one answered, the kids ran back to Jim and he walked the kids to the next house. He confirmed that Ronald didn't follow the kids but joined the group a few minutes later. Jim said that Ronald was wearing a trench coat that night. Police theorized that Ronald had hidden the poisonous pixie sticks in his long sleeves, just waiting for the perfect time to pass out the candy. Ronald's sister in law testified that at Timothy's funeral, Ronald talked about how he was going to spend the insurance money. This was in poor taste, to say the least, and she knew the O'Briens were having financial issues, so shouldn't any proceeds go to pay off their sizable debts?
That would be the logical course of action, so obviously Ronald has other plans,
I mean, I guess he wanted to enjoy some of his ill gotten windfall.
as you would.
She said Ronald mused about spending some of the money to go on a long vacation. I mean, maybe in Ronald's mind, he thought he could poison his daughter Emily's food and collect some more money.
I wouldn't be surprised, but how dumb can you be to draw attention to your motive?
I mean, he was not a criminal mastermind.
Fortunately, few of them are. Assistant District Attorney Vic Driscoll said that Ronald lied when he said he didn't know where the tainted pixie sticks came from. Attorney Driscoll argued that Ronald had lied and used people for years, from his fellow churchgoers to his friends and family. He said Ronald had sacrificed his son on the altar of greed, and that he had been willing to kill 4 other children to perpetuate the narrative that there was a deranged individual in their community to cover his crime. Defense attorneys Richard Harrison and Marvin Teague argued that the case was circumstantial and that no one saw Ronald purchase the poison or put the cyanide into the candy. They tried their hand at storytelling, suggesting that an unhinged person lived among them in the Houston suburbs and had laced the candy with cyanide. Prosecutor Mike Hinton asked the jury to sentence Ronald to death, since Texas allows for capital punishment in murder for profit cases. On June 3rd, 1975, the 10-men, 2-women jury deliberated for only 46 minutes to find Ronald guilty on all counts. It took them another 71 minutes to sentence him to death. Ronald spent his time on death row inside the Ellis unit in Huntsville. Fellow prisoners quickly nicknamed him the Candyman. Ronald didn't have an easy time in prison and was shunned by the other inmates whose moral code did not look kindly on murdering children, especially your own son. Because even criminals have standards.
I mean, most of them do.
Ronald was first scheduled to be executed on October 31st, 1982, the date picked by District Court Judge Michael McSpadden, because Ronald ruined Halloween for everyone. However, the Supreme Court refused to allow the scheduled execution, which would have been the United States' first execution by lethal injection. When Ronald was convicted, Texas used the electric chair to carry out executions. But since his conviction, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled the electric chair a cruel and unusual punishment. So Ronald was scheduled to die via lethal injection.
Oklahoma was the first state to adopt lethal injection, but Texas was the first state to make use of it. Ronald was the first inmate in the U.S. scheduled to be executed via state sponsored lethal injection. However, numerous appeals were filed on Ronald's behalf, and the Halloween 1982 execution was stayed. Ronald would miss the notoriety of being the first U.S. death row inmate to die this way. That dubious honor went to Charles Brooks Jr., who was executed on December 7th, 1982.
What a way to be remembered.
Yeah. Daneen divorced Ronald shortly after his conviction. She remarried a few years later, and her new husband adopted Elizabeth. When asked about his upcoming execution, she said that it was a long time coming. She didn't think that her ex-husband was either sick or insane, but that he was perverted. Daneen never cashed in on the life insurance policy, referring to them as blood money. Ronald's appeal avenues were explored and turned down for nearly a decade after he was sentenced to death. His execution was rescheduled for March 31st, 1984. Attorneys tried to halt his execution, calling lethal injection cruel and unusual punishment. Ronald's attorney, Stephen Presser, with the ACLU, brought a preliminary injunction to stay the execution. The judge denied the motion. Presser appealed to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans via phone, partially basing his appeal on the recent execution of James David Autry on March 14th, 1984, in Huntsville, who took 15 minutes to die after being injected. Robert Gunn with the Texas Department of Corrections said the dosage of sodium pentanol, which is one of a 3-drug cocktail administered, was too low and would be increased so death could come sooner and be more humane.
Proponents of the death penalty remained outside of the prison during Ronald's execution, throwing candy and chanting "trick or treat." On the other side were Ronald's supporters who somehow believed in his innocence. They prayed and openly wept. One such supporter, an 18-year-old college student who had written to Ronald, yelled out, "I'll miss you." Ronald was pronounced dead 10 minutes after he was injected with the toxic substance. Fittingly for an optician, his eyes were removed per his request so they could be donated. He continued to profess his innocence until the very end. In a final statement, Ronald said that the death penalty was wrong, but that didn't mean the entire justice system was wrong. He said he forgave all who were involved in his death, stating, "God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be yours always." Before and after Timothy's poisoning, rumors of dodgy sweets being handed out have always surfaced around Halloween. The idea that depraved strangers are targeting children with tainted Halloween candy, however, is more fiction than fact. Parental fear that candies contain poison, broken glass, or razor blades continues to this day, though there's little to no evidence to suggest parents actually have anything to worry about. As adults, we don't believe in monsters, but we do believe in criminals. Since Timothy's murder, there hasn't been a single case where a child has actually died after consuming contaminated Halloween treats.
Urban legends are often circulated and told over many years, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a scary story. The longer the legend has been around, the more people tend to add their own spin to the story, maybe making it a little scarier, a little closer to home. I remember when I was young, dumping my Halloween windfall on the floor and having my dad pick through it. Anything with a tear or perceived little tiny hole was immediately thrown out. And I also remember that the suspect candy was always the candy bars, most notably the Snickers that were deemed questionable. And of course, the Laffy Taffy and Sweet Tarts were always just fine.
Of course, the ones you wanted were the ones you weren't allowed to have. Thanks for not throwing away my chocolate.
I mean, you're welcome, though I do seem to remember you getting a lot of what you didn't really want.
That's true.
As with most rumors and concerns about the boogeyman, it is much easier for people to believe that a stranger may harm their children as opposed to know that sometimes the ones whose job it is to protect us is actually the wolf in sheep's clothing, who decide their child's life is worth more to them dead than alive. And I'm going to end with some references to Timothy's murder and pop culture. Like the sadist in 74, check your candy at the door.
That's kind of good.
Or beware the Candyman's game, or your Halloween won't be the same, which isn't quite as catchy.
We can't all ride earworms.
Because the man who killed Halloween still haunts All Hallows Eve, even 50 years later.
And to keep the horror fest going, we're continuing with more child murder. 9-year-old Lisa Ann French said goodbye to her parents and left her home at 192 Amory Street in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, a little before 6 p.m. on October 31st, 1973. Dressed in a green parka, jeans covered with masking tape, and a felt hat, Lisa had gone trick-or-treating as a hobo.
Oh my God, I swear, I just now remembered my mom dressing me the same, but I think maybe the time period she was going for was supposed to be the 1920s. And I remember I actually had a long stick with a bandana tied to the end with some kind of probably socks in it. And then she put makeup on my face. So I guess I would appear, I mean, this is lovely. So I would appear dirty, I guess. I mean, wow, good times. I think I may have blocked that until just now.
I can see why. What's wrong with wearing a sheet and going as a ghost?
Good point.
Problematic as this costume unquestionably was, it was a sign of the times, and it wasn't even Lisa's first choice. She had wanted to be a butterfly, but her mother had worried that she would be too cold in the crisp autumnal air. Lisa's beautician mother, Marianne DePau, had recently cut her brown eyed daughter's hair into a fashionable shag, and Lisa had drawn freckles on her face. Lisa had planned to meet her best friend, Ann Parker, and go to Pumpkin Place, a block where some parents were throwing an outdoor party to keep their kids safe from the usual poison candy and razor filled apples lurking in the bags of unsuspecting trick or treaters. But Anne had been grounded just before the pair were supposed to meet up, and she never ended up going out that Wednesday night.
Left trick or treating on her own, Lisa had already walked down the tree lined street to a teacher's and gone across the street to the home of one of her classmates before reaching her third and final house of the night, 152 Rose Avenue. Located only a half a block from the French's home, this unassuming suburban property belonged to 24-year-old Gerald Miles Turner, Jr., a machinist working for the Sioux Line Railroad. Gerald was a familiar face to Lisa. He had rented the other unit of the French's duplex for 4 months earlier that year. Lisa was trusting and kind, helping anyone she could. She had recently taken a large bag of her old clothes to school for a classmate and had made a habit of pushing Gerald's girlfriend's baby girl in her stroller down the street. She would often pop over to say hi or to show Gerald something she thought was interesting. Lisa had no reason to be afraid as she made her way towards Gerald's porch that Halloween night.
Seeing his open door, Lisa let herself in. Gerald found her in his doorway, grinning up at him from underneath her felt hat. It only took Gerald closing the door for her to realize something was wrong. He took 9-year-old Lisa into his bedroom, stripped her, put her on his bed, then raped her. When he noticed that she was no longer breathing, Gerald began trying to revive her until his girlfriend, Arlene Penn, walked through the front door. Making his priorities real fucking clear, he abandoned his attempt, covered his hands with socks, and moved Lisa's body to the nearby bathroom.
I mean, I guess his girlfriend finding an unconscious and nude 9-year-old child on his bed just might reflect badly on him. I mean, I wonder if she could have been saved at this point.
I know. Since she wasn't, I can only hope that she went quickly.
Yeah, hopefully.
Arlene Penn had no idea what had happened when she came home that evening with her daughter around 7:15. When they returned from the party Lisa was meant to attend at Pumpkin Place, Arlene discovered Gerald in a robe on the couch. He said he was sick and kept going into the bedroom to lay down. Arlene didn't follow him. She left again to see her mother later that night. If she had stayed home and gone into the bathroom, she would have stumbled upon Lisa's badly hidden body. Busy as she was with looking after Lisa's newborn brother Michael, Marianne started worrying when Lisa still wasn't home at 7:30 p.m., half an hour past her curfew. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, news of Lisa's disappearance had spread throughout the neighborhood, and Betty Wofale, who headed the PTA-sponsored group of block parents, took action by calling 50 of the other members and instructing them to turn on their lights and stick signboards in their windows.
I mean, that's a neighborhood coming together.
I do love the camaraderie.
After Marianne and Bruce DePau, Lisa's stepfather, called the police, authorities launched an all-night search. Marianne had divorced Lisa's biological father, Alan French, and he hadn't seen his daughter in over a month due to the long hours he was putting in at Rockwell International in Oshkosh. With nothing to show for their intensive Halloween night efforts, a county-wide search began on November 1st. More than 5,000 residents of the working class community banded together with law enforcement officers to conduct a ground search for the missing girl. National Guard helicopters and private planes scanned from the skies as Land Rovers plowed through marshlands. Volunteers on horseback combed through the fields, and authorities dragged the nearby bodies of water. Local gas stations gave 25 gallons worth of free gas to those looking for Lisa in a vehicle, and 6,000 copies of the fourth graders' Chegwin Elementary School photo were produced by Mercury Marine's Photo Lab.
The search came to a heartbreaking close in less than 4 days when around 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, November 3rd, farmer Gerald Braun spotted a plastic bag on his way home. It stood out in the farm field located in the wooded area beside McCabe Road, just a few miles northeast of Fond du Lac in the town of Taycheedah. Upon hopping off his tractor and opening the plastic garbage bag, he discovered Lisa's naked body stuffed inside. Her clothes were soon found in a separate bag nearby. 3 days after her body was recovered, Lisa Ann French's funeral took place on November 6th in Fond du Lac's Emmanuel Trinity Lutheran Church. Her classmates and fellow Troop 16 Girl Scout members filled 9 rows of the church, and the crowds of mourners walked quietly past the open white casket in which Lisa lay dressed in the same purple and white dress she had donned for her school picture day.
And I know people have different opinions, but I can't imagine taking your child to a classmate's funeral just on its own, just that, but to a classmate's funeral with an open casket.
Yeah, I think the intent is good, but I can also understand why a parent wouldn't want that image in their child's mind.
Agreed.
Once the police knew they had a murder on their hands, Gerald Turner was questioned during a routine neighborhood canvass. But if he was nervous, it must not have shown because the investigators quickly moved on to the next house.
But that didn't mean Gerald was home free. On March 27, 1974, Special Agent Carl Pietzka of the State Justice Department and Captain Melvin Heller of the Fond du Lac Police Department showed up at Gerald's home and asked what he had been doing the day Lisa went missing. While answering their questions, Gerald admitted to knowing Lisa and the French family. But he also made sure to mention that a number of children had knocked on his door on Halloween, so he couldn't be positive if Lisa had been one of them. A little over a week later, on April 7th, Captain Heller returned with Deputy Thomas Snyder of the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Department to address a discrepancy in Gerald's last statement. Having driven him to the Fond du Lac Safety Building for an interview, Gerald met with Special Agent of the State Justice Department, Louis Tomaselli, and agreed to provide samples of his body hair and bedspread fibers. Months later, on August 2nd, 1974, Gerald came back to the safety building for another interview with Agent Tomaselli. This time, Agent Tomaselli asked if Gerald would come to Madison to take a polygraph examination. According to Gerald, he tried to leave, but was told that he would be charged for involvement in the death of Lisa French if he walked out of the conference room.
This wasn't the first time Gerald had been asked to take a polygraph, and he was dead set against repeating the experience. When he had previously been charged with the statutory rape of a 15-year-old babysitter in December 1972, Gerald had agreed to take a polygraph to clear his name. But it never took place because the examiner failed to turn up 3 different times. Gerald posted a $250 bail bond, and the case went no further than that.
So what? He just got a pass?
Based on what I saw, it sure seems like it.
Ugh.
Yet, with the threat of being charged in connection to Lisa's death hanging over him, Gerald reluctantly agreed to go to the State Crime Laboratory in Madison. Once there, he answered all the questions of Chief Polygraph Examiner Robert Anderson. But the results weren't satisfactory, so Gerald agreed to retake the examination 6 days later in Fond du Lac. The day before the second test was to take place, Laureen Forsyth, who was living with Gerald at the time, called Captain Heller to tell him that Gerald wouldn't be coming in. Not happy with the brush off, on the morning of August 8th, Captain Heller went to Gerald's home to find out why he had changed his mind. After Gerald started complaining about how he had been treated in the 1972 statutory rape case, Captain Heller said he would look into what had happened with the earlier charge, and Gerald changed his mind yet again and decided to go to the Fond du Lac Safety Building that afternoon.
Am I missing something with the statutory rape charge? He was willing to take the polygraph, but the examiner failed to show 3 times and he got off? I mean, why so much whining about how he was being treated?
That's great. I thought the exact same thing. The only answer I can come up with is that Gerald's just a whiny douche.
I mean, that tracks. Once Gerald was in the conference room with Agent Tomaselli, Captain Heller, and Deputy Snyder, he explained that although he didn't want to sit for the polygraph because of what had happened 2 years earlier, he would answer questions about Lisa French. Gerald was led into the room where Robert Anderson was setting up the polygraph equipment, but mercurial as ever, he now said he wouldn't be taking it after all. Even though Gerald was allowed to see which questions had triggered his stress response in the first test, he still wasn't on board with retaking the examination. Yet, his refusal to answer questions while hooked up to a lie detector didn't mean that he was unwilling to talk. Having waived his right to an attorney, he posed a hypothetical question to Agent Tomaselli and Chief Polygraph Examiner Anderson. What if Lisa French had died accidentally? This thinly veiled admission of guilt led to a nearly 2 hour long conversation that ended in a 5 page confession to the murder of Lisa Ann French. 9 months after she went missing, 25-year-old Gerald Turner, a divorced father of two, was charged with first-degree murder and sexual perversion. Is that a worse charge than rape?
Apparently, Wisconsin changed the term for the crime of sodomy, which historically legalized homosexuality, to sexual perversion in 1955. It wasn't until the Consenting Adults Bill in 1983 that sexual perversion was decriminalized. Obviously, in this case, it wasn't referring to sex between two consenting adults, but anal rape of a child.
Got it. Although Gerald's court appointed counsel repeatedly attempted to have this confession suppressed, it was ruled to have been given voluntarily. And following a preliminary hearing, the charges of indecent behavior with a child and enticing a child for immoral purposes were added to the first degree murder and sexual perversion charges.
The same month Gerald was finally arrested, Mary Ann gave birth to her youngest child, Lisa's sister Susan. Instead of being able to devote herself to the newest member of their family, Lisa's mother would spend the next year testifying against her oldest daughter's murderer. As soon as Gerald's trial kicked off on January 27th, 1975, the prosecution leaned hard on his confession and the hairs belonging to Arlene Penn, his girlfriend at the time of the murder, that were discovered on Lisa's body and clothes to contend that he had murdered Lisa in their home. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the confession had been coerced, as Gerald now said that he had only signed it because he got sick and tired of being harassed by police calling on me. Despite his claims of innocence, the chief psychologist at the Taycheedah Correctional Institution, Robert Owens, stated that the man nicknamed the Halloween Killer had a disregard for other people, particularly women, and couldn't resist his urges, even when they were against the law. The disregard Gerald had for Lisa was horrifyingly explained by Dr. Robert Karlofsky. The pathologist who had conducted her autopsy detailed how the then 24-year-old Gerald had forced his fingers into Lisa's vagina, then anally raped the 4-foot, 5-inch, 63-pound 9-year-old, causing tearing and bleeding around her vagina and anus. The physical and emotional trauma activated Lisa's sympathetic nervous system and resulted in primary shock that made her heart stop. In the absence of circulation, carbon dioxide built up in her system and her oxygen levels plummeted, leading to death from asphyxiation. Dr. Karlofsky testified that this type of fatal reaction is seen in less than 1% of sexual molestation cases.
Oh my God. That poor little girl. I hope she went into shock quickly.
It's sickening. Her biological father, Alan, said he hoped God took her away before violence happened to her so she didn't have time to be frightened. I mean, once the worst has happened, all you can do is try to mitigate it. So I think all any of us can hope is that she wasn't aware of what was happening for long, if at all.
Truly. After a charge of second degree murder was also submitted on February 4th, 1975, following nearly 8 hours of deliberation, Gerald Turner was found guilty of second degree murder, enticing a child for immoral purposes, abnormal sexual perversion, and indecent behavior with a child. In total, Gerald received a prison sentence of 38 years and 6 months. Although Gerald appealed his conviction in 1977, it was upheld. This good news was short lived, though, because in spite of Circuit Court Judge Milton Meister's remarks that Gerald lacked remorse, in 1992, Gerald was released on parole, it's hard to say, for good behavior from Wupan Correctional Institution after only 17 years and 8 months. He began living at the Bridge Halfway House, but residents of the Milwaukee neighborhood joined officials in protesting against having Gerald as their new neighbor. He was even fired from his job at a Milwaukee recycling plant after picketers made their voices heard there too. And good, I don't think he should have been let out at all.
You and me both. The public also wasn't about to accept the early release of a child rapist and murderer. And in November 1993, Gerald found himself back behind bars due to a citizen led civil lawsuit, which resulted in an appeals court ruling that his mandatory release date was miscalculated by the state. Even though he was scheduled to be let out again on July 15, 1994, Wisconsin's recently adopted sexual predator law helped send him to a secure mental institution. This civil commitment process came about due to the uproar instigated by Gerald's time on parole. Dubbed Turner's Law, Chapter 980 enables the state to commit violent sex offenders eligible for release to secure mental health facilities if they are deemed a threat to society.
Again, good. I love that the community didn't forget what happened to little Lisa 20 years later.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the community's response to her case. Infuriatingly, in a big fuck you to the 15-year-old babysitter from the 1972 case, an ex-girlfriend and two ex-wives who testified that Gerald beat and raped them after they refused to have sex, in January 1998, a jury determined that Gerald didn't meet the criteria of a sexual predator defined by Turner's Law, and he was released.
What the actual fuck?
For real. Despite his attorney's claims regarding his client's character, 7 months later, Gerald, who was working as a cook, pulled a knife and yelled at a caseworker at a Madison group home. But a judge still decided that wasn't enough of a reason to return him to prison.
Who the hell is this judge? I mean, really?
It's all so fucking ridiculous. Instead, the following year, Gerald reached a settlement with Waste Management of Madison after they violated Wisconsin law when they wouldn't hire him because of his criminal record.
I mean, were the attorneys incompetent? Could they have not said someone else was more qualified, or there were other reasons besides being a convicted child rapist and murderer that Waste Management didn't hire him?
It sure seems like a better argument could have been made.
Thankfully, Gerald wasn't a free man for long. He was sent back to prison in 2003 for another 15 years after authorities learned he violated the terms of his parole with his pornographic collection of magazines and videos, as well as the hundreds of images on a computer drive in his bedroom at the Foster Community Correctional House, the Madison Halfway House he was living in. Wow, I'm so surprised.
A predator with uncontrollable sexual urges, not being able to control them, you could knock me over with a feather.
I mean, really good job monitoring his computer.
I get this was decades ago, but we've left the 90s now. Computers were definitely a thing that authorities should have been aware of.
Yeah, especially with somebody like that. I mean, come on, people.
Yeah.
When that 15-year time span was nearing its end and Gerald was scheduled to be released from the Racine Correctional Institution in February 2018, Lisa and French's family rose to the challenge of keeping him locked up. They were determined that no one should ever have to go through what they had. As you'd expect, their lives changed irrevocably in the wake of Lisa's murder. unable to understand why Lisa's younger brother and sister weren't ever allowed to go trick or treating or to celebrate Halloween. Even without fully understanding what had happened, they knew enough to realize that the world was full of dangers. Every time Lisa's sister, Susan DePau, spotted a garbage bag on the side of the road, she couldn't help but wonder if someone was inside. I mean, that's heartbreaking.
I know, what a worldview to have as a child. Although Gerald said he thought Lisa was already dead from shock, Marianne thinks he should have been convicted of first-degree murder because he wasn't positive Lisa was dead when he stuffed her inside the trash bag. With her daughter suffering as a constant specter in her life, the idea of his release haunts her. Not about to leave that possibility to chance, over 4 decades after her daughter's murder, she and Susan started a petition in October 2017 on petitionsite.com, which received thousands of signatures within days. Following a huge surge in numbers on Halloween, by early December, it had collected around 20,000 signatures. Even though Marianne didn't know if the petition would succeed in amending any laws or lengthening Gerald's sentence, at the very least, she knew that she was ringing the warning bell loud and clear about a predator's possible release.
Go them.
I'm just in awe of families who use their tragedy to help others, not that they should be expected to. Simply surviving something like that is a feat in itself.
True.
As for Lisa's best friend, 38 years after the murder, Ann Parker may have moved to Florida, but the change in scenery did nothing to absolve the guilt she still felt over getting into trouble that harrowing Halloween night. She couldn't help but think that her presence might have saved Lisa.
I mean, she was 9, and he could have easily raped and murdered both of them.
It's completely true, but irrational guilt is a tenacious fucker. When Anne reached out to Lisa's mother, now Marianne Gehring, on Facebook, she found out that she had also relocated to Florida. Hoping it would help them heal, they decided to head back to Wisconsin the weekend after Halloween in 2011. Having visited Estabrook Cemetery and the place in which Lisa was found, the trip ended with Anne as a new member of the family.
I love that.
It's always nice when anything positive can come out of something so awful.
To save future families from enduring the pain the Frenches had undergone, the Wisconsin Department of Justice filed a petition in response to Gerald's mandatory release date in February 2018 to require his continued stay at a secure mental health facility. A psychologist for the Department of Corrections had determined that Gerald had mental conditions such as pedophilia that predisposed him to commit acts of sexual violence. This diagnosis came from numerous interviews with Gerald from prison in which he confessed to the sexual assault and rape of 10 children, ranging from as young as 2 years old, as well as 14 women. Was this true or just lies? I assume nothing was looked into.
Because no charges were filed, I assume that no corroborating evidence was found or that it was never investigated, but I could definitely believe that there are other victims out there.
Pointing to the finding that he was a sexually violent person under Chapter 980 and his rule breaking while under high risk supervision, the prosecution argued for his indefinite confinement and treatment. Although the case would go on for years, the state's efforts paid off when Gerald was released from Racine Correctional Institution in 2018, only to be sent to the Sandridge Secure Treatment Center in Boston. His lawyers' attempts to get Gerald out, which included the diagnosis of another State Department of Corrections doctor who did not believe he had any mental illness that would cause him to commit acts of sexual violence, have largely remained unsuccessful.
That said, the final decision regarding Gerald's freedom hasn't yet been made. After a hearing to decide if the 76-year-old should remain at Sandridge Secure Treatment Center was held in July 2025, Judge Anthony Nels ruled against another probable cause hearing, meaning a trial will likely take place in the 7-year bid to keep Gerald in indefinite confinement and treatment. The day after Lisa's funeral, Marianne discovered a stack of folded stapled notes inside Lisa's Bible, labeled a gift from God. In 1985, Lisa's mother sent copies of these notes, one of which reads, "Smile, God loves you," to her daughter's killer. Gerald never responded. His feeble offering to the mother of the child who never had the chance to grow up were the words he uttered during his sentencing when he said that he hadn't meant to kill her.
What, just rape her then?
Just that. As Marianne so rightly put it, he should not be released. When Lisa can come back and have her freedom, so can he.
Here.
Seriously, who's going to argue with that? In the years since the brutal assault and murder, Lisa hasn't been forgotten. Now, Fond du Lac has set trick-or-treating hours that take place before nightfall in an attempt to protect children from the very real monsters among them. All right, we're going to leave it on that terrifying note. Next week, we'll resume our regularly scheduled programming when we return to female killer nurses with the case of Megan Haynes.
All the sources we use for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or a theme for us to discuss, you can email us at terrifyingthetypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifying the Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifying the Typical Pod on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.